Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the first round of the 2025-2026 Superprestige, the 44th edition of the Superprestige, the oldest cyclocross classification there is. And with me here to discuss it all is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
No video podcast today, just audio. I'm actually on my way back from the race in Ruddervoorde, recording from the car today with Issam recording the audio file. So we'll just stick with the audio, but we'll be back this week with a midweek episode for our power rankings, which will have video again. And certainly Issam, the racing today didn't disappoint at all. It was the first big race of the season, if you want to call it that. The crowd here was, actually I was quite surprised by the numbers. It seemed more than in previous years. The organizers spoke about some 4,000 to 5,000 people. Last year they were at 2,500 to 3,000 people. They were quite pleased with that. And certainly, as they say in Dutch, the speaker, the race announcer on course mentioned it a number of times. It was racing to, and there's a Dutch saying for you, lick your fingers and thumbs, because that's how tasty it was.
Indeed it was. It was racing in which everyone had their own story, and it was everything somewhat happened. We had Nieuwenhuis trying to put the others under pressure, making it a break, and then it was up to the other riders to try and close that gap with Van Toerenhout and also Viseuren, and it was just very difficult to control somewhat, but it was also very difficult to make the difference. And I think that is something that we see year in, year out when the circumstances are like they were today. When it's dry, when it's fast, then Ruddervoorde becomes a race in which it's just so difficult to make a difference. And we saw that basically from the start of the race. I think that the way Nieuwenhuis put the others under pressure, attacked, that really made the race super hard, because you saw at the finish how they were all gasping for air and struggling and trying to get their posture back up. It was truly a difficult ride. And going into the later stages of the race, we really saw that Van Toerenhout was very strong. That Nieuwenhuis, despite the fact that he put a lot of effort in that attack, was still going strong. And we had a Toon Aerts that was slowly but surely trying to get himself back into a race. He was there or thereabout, but he was always somewhat trying to close gaps. But he never took that much initiative, I have to say. And eventually, when you look at how the finish was as well, with Toon Aerts trying to make the last corner to eventually get himself probably on a podium, but then he crashes there, talking about the timing of us having that discussion on if Toon Aerts is a changing person. I mean, that mistake somewhat gives us a no for an answer. And then you go to the finish line. Van Toerenhout leads Nieuwenhuis out. I honestly thought that Nieuwenhuis was probably going to be able to get around, but he wasn't, and Van Toerenhout wins, which was an extremely strong effort, but also shows in a way that I have to say the duo of Van Toerenhout and Nieuwenhuis look, at the moment, I have to say, super strong. Kevin Kuhn misses out on a podium, which was, I think, a shame. And it was Van de Putte that picked up the pieces of Toon Aerts and was able to round up that podium. And I thoroughly enjoyed that race. I really enjoyed the last lap as well. It was a lot of suspense. I was really enjoying it. And I think the viewers at home must have enjoyed it as well. And we have plenty to discuss.
Those are a lot of global thoughts. So in short summary, I guess, of the race, it was a race in three phases. In the first phase of the race, we had a very, very large leading pack. I would say that was probably the first 3 laps. 20, 22, 25 riders just stretched at the front of the race. No real separation anywhere. We saw Cameron Mason showboating on the bumps a number of times. It was still a little bit relaxed. And then came the attack of Nieuwenhuis, which you already alluded to. And that was really, like you said, a key moment in the race, because he was kind of allowed to get away. He attacked on the road without much reaction, because they gave him this 10-second advantage for free, with Tom van der Bos kind of trying to lead the chase after he'd put in a bit of effort himself already. That was really the moment that kind of cost a lot of riders because they needed to go so deep in that chase to regain those seconds they gave away on the road, because Nieuwenhuis had attacked earlier in the sandpit, but he got his advantage on the road. And those efforts paid by, for instance, Joran Wieseuren to close that gap again to a super strong Nieuwenhuis, I think really cost them in the end, because who were the riders doing the work in the chase there, Issam? Wieseuren, Van de Putte and Van Toerenhout. Two of those three riders we didn't really see again after. Van de Putte is lucky to collect third on the podium. Of course, in the final lap you can leave it up to Van de Putte to find a way to outperform what he's shown in the last 2 or 3 laps. But the effort there was not insignificant, and that Van Toerenhout is the only one able then to still have the legs, I think says something about the overall form of Van Toerenhout. And in a way he also rewards your trust, and you apparently have a very sharp eye, because here I was on Thursday saying, well, Van Toerenhout on number 1, is he really going to win much early in the season on the dry courses? And here he does it in a sprint against a rider who is not slow at all. It was just a matter of who had most left in the tank, and that was Van Toerenhout, clearly underscoring his early season form.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could see the relief after the race from Van Toerenhout, that he must have gone through quite some pressure, especially in the position he is right now, with Iserbyt not being next to him, helping him out in these type of races. And as we said, Van Toerenhout is not your typical, multiple race winner throughout a season. He picks his wins somewhat, and it has to be, the circumstances have to really lean towards him and favor him for him to actually be able to win. And today was not really that case. He was comfortable on this course, that was for sure, but to win it the way he did it today is, I have to say, somewhat of a statement in the abilities of Van Toerenhout and the way he has to ride right now, because if he wasn't doing that, Paul Sauser was probably going to look at that zero in terms of televised races victories this season. And so Van Toerenhout is there to save the day. And the way he was riding, it was a bit smarter than he was doing in Molenbeek. I think he learned his lesson there a little bit, that it is almost impossible to control everything. And he was making sure that he wasn't the only one that was chasing. He was really trying to put the others also at work, but also taking his part in the chase if it was needed. And it was a very, very solid ride from Van Toerenhout, and I think that the way he normally performs and the consistency that someone has at times, it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to be able to be up there again in the next couple of weekends. And I think that with an Overijse coming up, I want to see him there as well, because I think that would be a race that suits him normally quite well.
Most definitely, that's a great course for him. With the Koppenberg, there's another typical Michael Van Toerenhout course coming up, and while he's still not the biggest winner, he's definitely, over the last 4 seasons, become way more of a winner than he was before. I agree that he was smarter than in Molenbeek, but what also played a factor in that is you have to just underline that in Molenbeek, Crelan Corendon was more able to roll the attacks. But because Nieuwenhuis was away for the best part of half of the race, Crelan Corendon was put in the defensive. They couldn't roll the attacks. They were the ones chasing themselves as well. And then later on, this course here also doesn't have that many opportunities to really roll these moves, because it's so technical, it stretches out the group so quickly that it's just difficult for riders to make their move. We saw Sweeck going into the penultimate lap, the moment at which Wieseuren attacked to the win last year. We had an earlier race move by Toon van der Bos, but it didn't really allow them to really come in. And while they had a lot of riders in the front group on the final lap, I think they had 5 out of the 11 front runners, the legs also matters. You can have the numbers, but Wietse Meeuwse and Emile Verstringen, they were just there on paper. They didn't have the legs to do anything. Sweeck today also didn't make a great impression. Van der Bos shot everything he had in the first race. It was really up to Wieseuren for most of it, and he, like I said before, he contributed to the chase and then didn't have the legs to really push through. So I think we got a good sense of who is where, and you said this on Thursday, Nieuwenhuis and Van Toerenhout were, in your eyes, the two strongest riders, and I would agree with that. About Nieuwenhuis, I don't really think it was a mistake to start the sprint second. Neither do I think it was a mistake to make that move early on in the race, because it put him in a good position. He could kind of sit back and not need to push as deep as the chasers, because he was more in control. He could decide if he wanted to push through with his attack, and at some point when the gap had been around 6 seconds for half a lap, at that point he just decided, okay, now I'll just let them come back. It's definitely not going to go until the end, but I don't want to waste all my shots. So I think he rode a race which was somewhat opportunistic, but not a bad race at all. I don't see any reason to be that critical of his tactical abilities.
Absolutely not. I think that it was the circumstances somewhat gave him that opportunity, and at one point then, when he had like 13-14 seconds, it would be foolish to not continue riding, because on this type of course with Ruddervoorde, it's just that gap to close it is just extremely hard. So you just know that your competitors, if they were able to close it, they also had to suffer. So I think that he just sees that opportunity. It didn't really work out the way he probably would have liked it to play out. But I think that, the fact that he was able to continue to play a role for victory after that attack also shows that he just had very strong legs. And on that second part, or at least what you also pointed out in terms of him sitting in the wheel of Van Toerenhout into the last corner, I think it would have been better to be up front, because it's just a tricky corner. But I don't think it's particularly wrong or something. It's just it is a decision that you can make, and in the end he just didn't have enough, and Van Toerenhout rode an extremely strong sprint, which was just very hard to get around. And it is what it is. You have to accept it and try to get better legs. But I think with Nieuwenhuis, if you compare it already to how he was racing in Meulenbeke, I think he is getting stronger and stronger, and he's going to be dangerous for this field in the next coming weeks as well. I think that if he is able to find a little bit more, it's going to be trouble for even a guy like Van Toerenhout, because I feel that he has just that little edge over Van Toerenhout if it comes to the type of races. And overall, I think that if Van Toerenhout doesn't have, his courses, it will be difficult for Van Toerenhout to battle it out with Nieuwenhuis. But we have to wait and see how that will play out, I guess. But it is definitely interesting how it's developing currently.
I do think that Nieuwenhuis and Van Toerenhout share a lot of similarities in their rider profile, because both are better on muddy courses. So the conditions today in Ruddervoorde certainly aren't the best for them. Both of them like the climbing courses, although Van Toerenhout probably a bit more. So there is some overlap there, and there's a lot of courses where these two riders will be the main favorites. So that was definitely an interesting dynamic today to see them fight it out here already. And perhaps it's not a very promising sign for riders who are more specialists on these faster type of courses, that even here they're seeing that Van Toerenhout and Nieuwenhuis are beating them. But we will see next week in Heerde. We're going to another course which will likely be fast. It's supposed to rain all week, so Overijssel will definitely be muddy. Heerde will be slightly faster, but could also have that grass section ripped up. So enough to think about for next week. But before we get there, I think we should go over some of the other main protagonists in the front group, Issam, because the move was actually made in the penultimate lap. That was when we had four riders kind of briefly getting away, and that was not Niels van der Putte, who eventually finished third. No, that were Toon Aerts and Kevin Kuhn. It were those four riders. They also had a brief gap in the final lap until everything got back together again. I don't know, maybe we should start with Toon Aerts first, because he was looking on course to finish third, and you already mentioned, we discussed, is Toon Aerts a new rider? Is he going to start making flawless executions? And the answer today clearly was no, because all he needed to do was make that final corner and he was going to finish on the podium. But maybe there's a scientific law I don't know about here. Toon Aerts cannot finish a race without making a mistake, because for the rest of the race, he, in my opinion, executed near enough flawlessly. He clearly didn't have the legs to compete, but unlike in other races, he didn't waste energy in chases. He just decided to sit in the wheels. He would see how everything rolled out. And it worked because he was nearly going to finish on the podium, a position that would be somewhat undeserved for how his race had been going. And then he crashes in the final corner, which you just called it a tricky corner, but I hadn't seen anybody crash. In his defense, the rain intensity did pick up in the final lap. There were some drops coming down, but again, like, he was probably with his head already in the sprint and thinking, oh, I can still sprint maybe for the win, and he got ahead of himself. But it's again a mistake that he's making too often, which cost him a good result after a race which until that moment I think was very, very good.
It was raining. No, it's you know, I saw that mistake and I thought, come on. It's like, if you needed any proof, you got it right there. And it's a shame for him, because I think, as you said, up until that point, it was a strong race. It was a race in which you clearly could see that Toon Aerts was not having the legs to win. But he was there. You know, he had to close some gaps, as I said, and that made it obviously a bit more difficult. But the podium was his. I don't think Van der Putte was going to be able to get around him there. But you have to stay on your bike up until the finish line, and he missed that message somewhere and missed the corner, crashed, and that was it. And yeah, he ruined his day, because I think that it was up until that point, it was all going somewhat his way in terms of a podium. And it's troublesome to see, but I mean, Kuhn was surprising. I mean, we have seen last year from him that he was quite good here, but the way he was racing was extraordinary almost. And I think that if things got his way a little bit more, he was probably going to be able to somewhat position himself in front of Aerts. And who knows what could have happened. Maybe he was going to be on the podium, but he wasn't really able to. The legs on the last lap were just, he was emptying himself a little bit, and it was he was getting cooked, and he just really didn't. He wasn't really able to make the right moves in the end. And if he was, it was definitely going to be a podium, but he just couldn't reward him. But nevertheless, I think that for him, fourth place, just missing out on that is not terrible. It's actually the opposite. I think that it looks like Kuhn has made some steps over the summer.
It's curious how these races sometimes work, because for laps and laps, Kuhn was hanging in there, like at the back with Laurens Sweeck, with Jente Michels. They were distanced, they were 15, 16 seconds down, but the race came his way. And when he came back, he took that opportunity. He saw Sweeck attack from the back, he went in the wheel, he realized quickly that Sweeck didn't have much in the tank, and then made his move, and Sweeck kind of started dropping down the order and cogging up everything. And then Aerts didn't have a great passage through the sand either, and they got a little gap and they were away for a while, but it wasn't to be. In the final lap, he still fought well, he was in position. So it was a really respectable effort by him, really, really special, I would say. Like, he did what normally you would expect of a rider like Sweeck. When Sweeck comes into that situation, you're thinking like, okay, Laurens Sweeck, he's here, he means business. He had a few good passages through the sandpit. He was the rider who rode it the furthest, the Sandman. Who else can do it, right? You would think, wow, Sweeck. Now he gets this, he sees the initiative, he smells the front of the race, he smells some wins, he's gonna pull the trigger. But instead it's Kuhn who completely takes over the momentum, and then isn't afraid to put up the fight in the final lap. He was in third. The move where Toon Aerts overtakes him was fair racing, side by side. Eventually somebody will draw the short end of the stick there, so that's fine. I did think in that phase it was interesting. We spoke about defensive lines yesterday, and Van Toerenhout rode one coming down the hill before the 180 into the sandpit. He looked back, saw Aerts thinking about lunging it down the inside, and Van Toerenhout immediately swerved over and kind of compromised the run into the sandpit. On that sandpit, you saw that apparently some people need to pay a bit more attention to Pythagoras in high school, because why does Van Toerenhout overtake Nieuwenhuis there? Because he cuts across to the inside where Nieuwenhuis goes the long way around. Why is Kevin Kuhn all of a sudden down the inside of Toon Aerts, going side by side? Because he also cuts across more than Toon Aerts. So you can see that the line choice there and not just running straight because that's where the rut is or where the trail is of pushing my bike, you could see that played a dynamic role there. Koen, despite being on the inside of Aerts there, didn't have the momentum enough. He kind of got cut off. He tried that move dismounting down the inside, also overtook Van Toerenhout in that. I like the move, I respect it. He makes a big play for the podium. Like we discussed yesterday, you make a move for the win if you're Cameron Mason. In Koen's case, this is you make a move for the podium. I respect that. It's just very hard to remount there. It's super bumpy. You could see him thinking about remounting a number of times, but then realizing that he couldn't really do it there. But still, it was a good move, one worth trying. Yeah, is this now all of a sudden a Kevin Koen that we will see in contention for podiums every week? Probably not, but there's no better way to tell your team that they made a mistake by dropping you than outperforming all of their riders.
No, absolutely not. I think that that he just really showed himself up there, and I think I have to agree with you on that one. I think that he definitely, it looks like he made a step, but it doesn't particularly mean all of a sudden that Koen is going to be battling it out for podiums in the next coming weeks. But who knows? You know, we will see probably in the next coming weeks what that step actually means when we get to the more traditional courses. And it was also today, it was somewhat of a weird race because the circumstances of certain riders they had to get through. It wasn't a clear race for almost no one, to be honest. Everyone had their issues, had their troubles, had to close their gaps, and it was an eventful race for all the riders. So we have to see in where we can place this, but I think the next couple of weeks will tell us more of a clearer story, I guess. And yeah, we have to wait and see.
Then I think we should look at the entire top 10. I think I know the top 7 maybe. Win, of course, here for Michael van Toerenhout ahead of Joris Nieuwenhuis, Niels van der Putten. 4th place Kevin Koen, 5th place Joran Wieseuren. And here's where it gets iffy. I think 6th place Toon van der Bos. Is that correct, Issam? And then 7th...
We have to go with Jente Michels.
Oh, Jente Michels. I thought it was Sveek.
Nah, it was Michels in 7th, Laurens Sveek in 8th, Emiel Verstringen in 9th, and Wietse Meuse rounding up the top 10 in 10th. Yeah, I mean, Michels, to be honest, he was, can I say, somewhat riding anonymously. He was always somewhere there in the top 10, but he was outside of the top 10 also for a while. But he was there, you know, he wasn't able to play a role up front, but he was always kind of looking to get himself in that position. And to be honest, not a bad outing for him to finish in there in 7th. I think that he can be somewhat happy with that. I mean, not satisfied to the utmost, but I think it was not a bad result for Jente Michels.
It wasn't bad, but you here already kind of name my problem with Jente Michels. You say he's there. That's kind of how I always feel about Jente Michels. He never has this performance that really excites me. And perhaps I should give him more credit for his performance in Namur last year because he was good there. But there the wow factor was stolen by his teammate, Tibor Del Grosso. So Michels, it's not bad. And we talked in our, I think, last week in the Empty Race Week episode about Jente Michels needing to raise his bottom, like raise his floor, that he doesn't really have those off days anymore. But I think he's a solid rider. I just need like a few performances that really excite me because even in the U23 categories, I haven't seen them of him. But today was certainly a solid outing for him. Who else did we have? I think Verstringen was kind of pushing his limits, getting into the groove of racing. Sveek didn't have the legs. I already kind of attributed to that. You could see that a number of times where he kind of made this push through the sandpit, came somewhat close, gained a few seconds, but then didn't have the legs in that section afterwards to really push through and firmly reposition himself in the leading group. That brings us probably next to the disappointment. Felipe Orts, not due to his own fault. He had a mechanical, I think he rolled a tubular or had a issue with his chain. Something happened. I saw him running from a distance. He looked strong before that, so that was definitely a bummer to see him fall away. His streak of 7th places in Ruddervoorde has been broken. But more due to their own fault, kind of collectively disappointing today. Balois' Glowy Lions, Issam, nowhere to be seen. Ron Haar eating the shit on the barriers after, I don't know what he was doing in the first corner. I'm posted up here and I just see this guy drifting into the first corner sideways, launching a dive bomb on like 15 riders. You talked about making your own luck. That certainly doesn't help in doing so. The crash wasn't related to that. That was just a mistake on the barriers. Van der Haar also, a bad start, needed to go into the pits. Kind of came to the forefront, 15th position, halfway through the race, then crashed. David Haverdings also showed himself relatively well in the first half of the race, but then the lights went out, so definitely not a strong outing for that team.
Troublesome, I think. We have seen Ron Haar struggle. I don't know what he was doing. Honestly, I have no idea what he was doing, but it wasn't going his way, let's put it that way. And for Van der Haar, it's with these type of races, it's just, if you're not getting in that rhythm, you're not going to get into the race again. And I think that was for Van der Haar an issue, and Haverdings was probably, of them all, despite the fact that he was behind both Ron Haar and Van der Haar, I think that for him it looks probably the most encouraging, because there were signs there of him riding quite well, and he needs to get in a little bit more. But I think for both Ron Haar and Van der Haar, I mean, I don't know what they, in terms of preparation, if they have an idea of trying to get in a better form later on in the season, which could be the case, huh? But at the moment, it looks like they have some issues, and they have to work on that and try to get better. And especially for Ron Haar, who I think we can somewhat conclude, if next week also doesn't go his way, that it is somewhat of a disappointing opening of a season.
But Ron Haar finished 12th in the end. I saw him come over the line just after Aerts. I think that his form is good. He's just over-eager to get back after last year. He was like 30th after that crash, banged up. It was a quite nasty impact. And then he recovered relatively well. So considering also like the nature of the race with how fast the pace was at the front and that bigger leading group, he did well to pick up all those riders. So I think that for Ron Haar, the form is there. He just needs to keep his cool, and he doesn't have that many points because of last year. His call-up isn't that great. And then you see like this kamikaze move into the first corner is kind of symbolic, I think, for the way that the impatience you have for him is something he has himself, is something that the commentators have as well. Oh, Pim Ron Haar, like, oh, he really needs to perform now. Oh, Pim Ron Haar, it's time to lock in. So I get where that's coming from, but I think if he can just approach these races with a calmer mental state of mind, then he will avoid making these mistakes like he did today, like he did in Molenbeek, and he can focus on really getting into the racing groove, into the flow, and then the points will come and he will move up the grid and everything will just kind of what I'm trying to say is just take a breather, Pim Ron Haar, relax. It will come, especially when the courses become muddy. You will be there. You are talented.
I think what didn't help probably is also that race in Molenbeek, where in the first lap he was caught up there in a crash, or at least he wasn't able to pass anyone there because it was just all stuck and he wasn't able to get through. That ruined his race there, because he tried then to move up again and he was quite enthusiastic in his chase, but that costs you. If you're too eager in your chase, it just hurts you in the long run. And maybe because of those events, he probably thought, I don't want to end up in a similar scenario again, because he was quite far back. But such a dive bomb is almost desperate. But I agree with you. I think that if you look at his form and you try to be as objective as possible, you can definitely see that it's not that he has terrible legs, but it's just the circumstances that he gets himself into, I guess, and what surrounds him right now, which doesn't help. And well, it's for him to try and turn that around, and even if you try to stay calm and hope for the best. And I can see your point in terms of if he gets a clean race, then we can truly judge him, I guess. And so far he didn't really have that.
No, and he will need to change his mental state, but I'm approaching it more that his problem is not his legs. His Problem is his head right now, and if he can kind of get that going and get in a groove and get that good result, it will work as a relief for him, because he will then feel freed from a certain degree of pressure and things will start going his way. So I think that's enough about Ron Haar and the men's race, and we should now shift our attention to the women's race, because that was also very, very entertaining. We had the French champion Amandine Foucounet taking the whole shot. She broke away in the first lap, then got joined up front by Leonie Bentveld from Paul Sauze. They had a brief leading gap, but it was Fem van Empel, the world champion, who bridged across. We went to a long race situation in which we had 8 leaders. We had 2 French riders. Besides Foucounet, there was also Helene Clausel. Then there were, of course, how else is it possible on this time of the year, Crelan Corendon riders. Norbert Ribeiro was there, the Belgian champion, Sarah Casasola, and Inge van der Heijden. Leonie Bentveld was there for Paul Sauze. Fem van Empel was there for Visma. And now I'm forgetting one rider, and Issam will tell me exactly who I'm missing in that leading group. Aniek van Alphen. Aniek van Alphen.
Aniek van Alphen.
It was Aniek van Alphen who was there, and she was kind of dangling at the back for a while. Foucounet was dangling at the back for a while, needed to go in for a bike change. Van Empel made a few tiny moves, but it wasn't to be. It was a tactical game, a waiting game. And then going into the penultimate lap, it was Ribeiro who attacked on the start-finish straight. It was the same time Sweek attacked in the men's race this year, and that was coincidentally the same time Johan Wieseur attacked to the victory last year. It's clearly a tactic of Crelan Corendon. I say jokingly, but it's definitely a pattern. 3 races, 3 Crelan Corendon attacks going into the penultimate lap, and 2 of them were successful, because what worked for Wieseur last year worked for Ribeiro this year. She got away, and the chase was being led by Foucounet, who had been at the back, who had not been making a strong impression even before her bike change. She had a shifting issue. I don't think it went into crash mode, but I think there was some sort of small stick in her cassette, which meant it was skipping. But she was the one needing to do the work in the chase. And she did actually do quite well on the power sections. On the straightaways, she managed to keep the gap to Ribeiro. But Ribeiro technically much better than Foucounet. Foucounet is one of the worst bike handlers at the front of the race. And it showed, because Ribeiro went away. The gap was stable around 7 seconds. Van Empel was nowhere to be seen. She was last of the group after Ribeiro attacked, moved away forward a little bit, didn't have the legs in the end to really push through in the final lap. And with that, Ribeiro won her first classified race in Belgium. And second place went to Casasola in a sprint, with third place going, quite surprisingly I must say, to Amandine Foucounet. No Dutch rider on the podium of a major cross for the first time since 2019 in Boom. It's quite a race, and I mean, also surprising, not just Ribeiro winning because of a tactical genius moment. Casasola coming to second. If you look at the way she cornered all day and was struggling in the sand, that should be considered surprising. And Foucounet, considering she was dropped and written off by the commentators halfway through the race, coming back to clinch third in the search for a contract because Arkea is folding. Wow, it was not the result I had expected here.
I think wow sums it up. It was to say before this race, beforehand, that Foucounet would be on the podium here on such a course, because as you said, her bike handling is definitely not the greatest, is extraordinary. But she had a very good day. You know, she was, from the start of the race, she really tried to force something, and then had a difficult moment in which you probably would say, okay, that is within a certain pattern. You know, you try very hard in the beginning, it catches up, and then it just becomes harder and harder to get through the rounds, and that seemed to be the way. But then she kind of got back into it, and you know, Ribeiro attacked, and all of a sudden it was Foucounet chasing her, and it was a strong ride from Foucounet, I have to say, but also from Ribeiro, who I think yesterday I said something along the lines of she just has to make sure that her races go a bit more her way, and I think it wasn't completely going her way up until that point, but then she made it go her way with that attack, and it was very well timed, especially because it felt like Van Empel and Bentveld heard each other Bentveld by following Van Empel, and Van Empel by putting the pressure on the rest, and that helped Ribeiro get away. And then of course the teammates are not going to chase, so it was all up to Foucounet, who in all honesty at that time was struggling, but eventually was actually stronger than I thought, and able to hang on there for third, which I have to say, if it wasn't for the bike change of Van der Heijden, probably would have been outside of the podium. But that's also part of racing.
I agree there, because Crelan Corendon seemed likely to kind of lock out the podium to me, but then they didn't. I think Van der Heijden was probably the strongest rider on the day. We can see that their number game played a real role. They did pile up the pressure earlier on. Bentveld was the one doing a lot of the responding to some of the earlier attacks, but she ran out of legs towards the end of the race. Van Empel didn't have it at the end of the race either. So then it came down to Foucounet, because Clauzel had the opposite, where she looked stronger than Foucounet early on, but then also kind of was gassed out by the end. But the numbers work at Corendon. They play it in a way which we've discussed before. They kind of take advantage of it and don't chase each other, but also don't really drop the gaps or are super annoying in the blocking, although there was certainly one moment in which they helped Ribeiro gain 5 extra seconds just after the sandpit. But I didn't really see anything which I thought was out of the ordinary or inappropriate or whatever. But I want to create some context and perspective here about the win of Ribeiro, and not as much as, oh, she only wins because of tactics. I want to come at it from a bit of a different angle, because do you think this win will be relieving for Ribeiro or further creating pressure? Because she is racing in what the Belgian media is describing the jersey of Sonnekant. She's in the Sonnekant uniform. She's the Belgian champion, an outfit that Sonnekant wore for the best part of 15 years if she wasn't world or European champion. And with Kant declining over the end of her career, all of a sudden this narrative was created, and it was very persistent at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, that Ribeiro should be able to win a number of classified cross races and she should be able to compete for World Cup wins. I don't understand where that comes from, other than that it comes from the fact that she is now the Belgian champion. But performance-wise, there's no reason to believe that. So will this win reduce the pressure on her, or will this win further reinforce the narrative? See, Ribeiro can win. She just needs to lock in, focus, she needs to execute. She doesn't need to make these silly mistakes anymore. How do you think that dynamic will play out for her? And do you think she actually cares? Because to me, she seems quite stubborn and quite immune for that type of pressure. But regardless, it will be a media story which we can make a prediction about.
Were you like listening to the broadcast as well, the Belgian broadcast, while you were there in Ruddervoorde? Because you're very close to what they were talking about. They were bringing it as if it's now from this moment on, Ribeiro is going to fight for victory for the next couple of races and could potentially even play a role for maybe a World Championships or something. That wasn't said, but the tone they were having in terms of, and they were talking about this, was incredible, I have to say. And it is, I wouldn't say delusional, but it is weird. Because I think that if you look at this race with a realistic perspective, you can clearly see that
it's borderline delusional. Is that what we can say then?
Well, it's borderline delusional. I think that you described it well there. I think it is borderline delusional, because I think I can definitely see that Ribeiro, it seems to me that way, that she made a step. But I think that they are somewhat exaggerating how big that step actually is, because sure, this win is going to... It looked, to be honest, in the last couple of races that Ribeiro somewhat had the chance of winning, but kind of shot herself in the foot, or something happened, and just... She never really got to the end of a race in the best way possible. And to be honest, now it seemed to be heading exactly that way. But then she had that attack, and it went as it went. And you need to have the legs to make that move work, which she had. You need to have the backing of your teammates, which she had. And who knows, this scenario is probably going to happen maybe in some other races. Because if you look at the field right now, it looks like the Krelan women at the moment are super strong, and maybe someone like Brandt is actually now currently the only one at the moment able to really crack that code, because Van Empel today was just unable to do that. So I think that I agree with you on the fact that Ribeiro is a bit stubborn and is probably not going to go with that whole sentiment of, she's probably realistic enough to know that that is not the case currently, and she is. We have to see if it will affect her. I hope not. But the Belgian media is probably going to walk away with this as if they have found Van Empel on the women's side for Belgium. That it's not going to be that way. It's just. I don't know. I don't even know what to say on that. But it's crazy that you said it, because on the Belgian broadcast it was somewhat experienced in that way.
It's just too predictable, especially I listened to yesterday's broadcast and the broadcast of Meulenbeke, and then it's quite easy to see where it's going, especially if you read the newspapers, which I read this morning. So it's also predictable in Belgium, and I agree with your point. I will say this though. Yes, Krelan Corendon has a collective of 3 very strong women at the front of the race right now. But I wouldn't write off Fem van Empel that easily for these early season races and say it comes down to Lucinda Brandt. Because Van Empel, the first 2 laps reminded me of the first 2 laps in Beringen last year. The technique was being awoken from a hibernation. It was her first race. She needed to kind of adapt. She needed to fine tune. And then it improved and it improved and it improved. But we know that Ruddervoorde is not one of the best courses for Fem van Empel. The technique of Fem van Empel is not her strong point. So that immediately means that Ruddervoorde is not one of the best races for her on the calendar. Additionally, in Ruddervoorde, positioning is super important. And we know that has historically been a problem for Fem van Empel as well. And it was again today. Because for a number of times, she was out of position. Her start wasn't good. She burned a match to come back from that. Then she made a few tiny moves. She had that one attack in the middle of the race when she went on the left side of the sand pit, which I think was a questionable move. It worked because Casasola was on the right, and Casasola, like I said, has problems with the sand. So that helped her get away from there, but it also created the illusion. The next lap you saw Bentveld do it, and it went absolutely nowhere. It went backwards for Bentveld. So in a way, Van Empel showed some signs of promise. I don't want to be too quick. I also don't want to be too harsh. We know what she's coming back from. I find it quite interesting that she... Interesting gives a weird connotation to it. I find it applaudable that Fem van Empel is in every single Dutch newspaper. She first announced her re-entree to the field in Dutch newspaper AD, and then she's been everywhere. Today there was a video and article on NOS, our public broadcaster. Yesterday there was a long read about her in Dutch newspaper Trouw. She's done a story with the Telegraaf. She's everywhere because she thinks it's important to talk about what she's been through, because she doesn't want younger girls to experience the same. I wanted to just applaud that, because I think that's very respectable, and you can see that also as a part of character development of Van Empel. I have seen enough in today's race to say Van Empel will be there this season. Maybe it's not as good as it was 2 years ago. Maybe it's not even as good as it was last year. But I do think that I have seen enough for Fem van Empel to kind of head towards those European Championships with a lot of encouragement and some degree of confidence.
I agree with you on both parts, by the way. I think that it's also important that the people talk about that sort of hidden part of an athlete, which is the mental part, which is, if you struggle with that, it's the best thing to do is to find help and to talk about it and to acknowledge it and try to find a solution. And I think that is commendable that it was up in the media and that there was talk about it. And yeah, I think that is obviously, it's difficult to overcome that. But on the racing side, I think that let me put it this way: is Van Empel maybe racing a little bit as if she had the legs that she had before, and should she maybe not look into trying a different approach in the racing? Because it seems that if she wants to, she doesn't have the 2, 3, 4 attacks that she had before. It seems to be that way, at least for me. Which, if she would have placed that attack on the last lap, I don't know how it would have played out. It could potentially have been a bit different. Does she maybe need to rework the way she approaches a race, or am I looking too much into it?
Well, I get where you're coming from, but remember our podcast in Meulenbeek, and what did we say? First race of the season, you place one big attack, you go into the red one time, and for most riders in that race, it cost them. And for Van Empel, this was her first race of the season. And by extension, for many riders, this was the second or third race of the season. And that's still kind of applicable. You're adjusting to that race hardness. So I think that you make a fair point. Should she approach a race differently? Perhaps. But if you purely refer to the number of attacks, maybe. Maybe she should become more of a rider that waits for the final lap if this continues. But for the rest, I don't think that her other things are really out of luxury. Like being in 8th place of that group and then thinking, oh, I'll just come back. That's not something that happens out of luxury. That's something that I've seen happen before in Ruddervoorde. I think it was last year or maybe 2 years ago, there was a smaller leading group, but she also got pushed to the last position of that group and it cost her the win. So I think that was last year in which she suddenly needed to overtake Casasola and Verdonschot. So some things are out of perhaps a position that she's created for herself, like the way she attacks, but other things are also just weak spots, and we've seen them be vulnerabilities for her in those few races in which she was under pressure in the past. So let's see if for Van Empel, I'll see her again in Woerden on Tuesday, midweek night action. That should be a interesting dynamic. Let's shift back to Crelan Corendon then, because I said already, I think Van der Heijden was the strongest rider today. She made a very good impression. To me, this is a very good course for her. She's such a versatile rider. She's developed so much compared to the rider she was when she was racing for CCC back in the day. And Casasola also very strong, but technically, I mentioned the point yesterday in Essen, in the forest section, that was visible again today. In the corner, she's not there, and then she's super strong that she can compensate for that. So I look forward to seeing what Casasola can do in Overijse and on the Koppenberg, because I think those two races will give a great indication of how good she really is. But today's result was definitely better than I would have expected from her at any point in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it was for Van der Heijden. I think, as you said, she looked the strongest this race, but just, with Ribeiro attacking, she couldn't really do anything, and with her bike issue, that just added up, and it was then extremely difficult to actually get a result out of it, which she was almost able to do, almost snatching third from Foucounet. So I think that she can look back on this race and be happy with where the form is, because I think that those are some good legs and the shape is there. And with Casasola, she was struggling in some of the sections in Ruddervoorde, as is typical for this course, and it exposes a little bit if you are technically not as gifted through certain corners. It shows, and Casasola was struggling, but it also kind of points out the way she was racing and the fact that she still had something left for the sprint. Look, that she was also quite strong. So I have to agree with you. I think that when we get to races in which that will play less of a role, hopefully we can see where Casasola is at, and that will also show us, I guess, the level compared to other riders. And I can't wait for those moments to come, to be honest.
Let's run down the entire top 10 then. I think I should have this one nailed down. Podium, and we still need to talk about the rider in third, and we'll do that just after the top 10. The win for Marja Norbert Ribeiro ahead of Sarah Casasola and Amandine Foucounet. Fourth place for Inger van der Heijden, with fifth place going to Leonie Bentveld. World champion Van Empel coming in sixth ahead of Aniek van Alphen and Helene Clauzel. Ninth place went to Lara Verdonschot, with Denise Betsema completing the top 10. I think the obvious rider we have still ignored, and I just said it already, we have to talk here about Amandine Foucounet. You already alluded to her a little bit, but what a performance. I didn't know she had this in her. We've seen her be a kind of backbencher in the top 10 for a number of years already, good on some of the faster courses. At the start, I got some flashbacks to the World Championships in Louvain, because there were also Clausel and Foucounet in front of the home crowd who went off on a flyer. Foucounet did the same here. She kind of repacked herself in the second half of the race, but especially that mental state, I think, was interesting, because she didn't give up, and the race kind of came towards her in a similar way as it came to Kuhn. And what we said about like one big push and kind of blowing up, perhaps that's also kind of applicable here, because Bentveld to me made a strong impression. I thought she was going to finish on the podium, but then in the final lap and a half, it just completely went out, the lights for her. And it was Foucounet, who we didn't really give anything for, who all of a sudden came back.
Which was weird, because I honestly thought that, in a way, it was true that because Foucounet was the one chasing, it was they didn't make any ground. But to be honest, I thought they would be losing even more ground if it was up to Foucounet. But apparently, she had enough energy left to put the effort in and keep it somewhat similar from start to finish, the gap. And she kind of got into that race because of the circumstances and took that, and there she was. And a very strong effort, I have to say. I did not expect it from her. I don't know where to place it, to be honest, because I think, what does this mean now? Is Foucounet now going to be someone who is a rider that we can expect closer to the top? Is she now going to be someone in the gap between what we have as the top riders and the second line? Is that where we can place her? Being more consistent in the top 10. I think that is something that we can expect from her at this point. But it's encouraging, to be honest. It's really encouraging. And, her technique was not great, but I would say it is somewhat of an improvement for where she once was. And I think that is also maybe encouraging for her.
Yeah, it's definitely an improvement. It's not nearly as bad as it was a few years ago, but I'll just have to take a few days to reshuffle Noah's 9, because there's definitely going to be a few changes to the order in there, and maybe I'll have to place Foucounet in there. I mean, it's kind of hard to ignore a Superprestige podium. It comes at a great moment for her. Arkea is folded. She, I believe, is still on the lookout for a new team. Hopefully this gives her, her search a much-needed boost. I don't know what's happening to Raphael Carrier. I've reached out to a few sources. She was on there as well, but so far I've got nothing on where she will be racing. I assume there will be interest from mountain biking teams in her as well, considering her performances on that discipline. So that is interesting. And whilst we're talking about contracts, I wanted to interview Helene Clausel today to kind of ask her about that. So after the men's race, I searched the entire parking area, and there was parking on the streets and another street, probably 2 blocks, and then a huge field, and I just couldn't find her. But then as I headed back to the course, at the exit of the team parking, under the Alpecin bus, it was Helene Clausel. And I will say she was in a conversation with Christophe Roodhoofd. So make of that what you want, considering she's also racing on a Colnago bike in the same colors as Orijenkamp. Make of that what you want, but typically 1 and 1 equals 2, and all that needs to come is a green kit, if you ask me.
Interesting.
Then I think for Ruddervoorde, one final mention. Manon Bakker had a very good start. If anybody would be dialed at this point in the season, it would be the rider who has already done 10 races in the US. But Bakker unfortunately came to an abrupt halt when she crashed, and then later she crashed again. It definitely was not a good day out for her, so let's hope she can repack from that and we can see more from her next week. Then, while I did have most of these top 10s ready, Issam will now talk us through the results in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, because there was also some American racing in Cincinnati last night. Take it away, Issam.
Yeah, so normally the section where you somewhat embarrass yourself with pronouncing the foreign names and all that, but now it's up to me, I guess. And let's go to, I guess we start with the Swiss Cyclocross Cup, which was headed for their second day in the Alperoskwer Schneisingen, or whatever the name was. On the men's side, it was Romain de Boer ahead of Theo Thomas and David Menu. And on the women's side, it was Célia Géry ahead of Lynn Burquier, who already is returning, doing some cyclocross, and Electa Galezot.
Yeah, so about that race in Schneisingen, I think it was interesting to see Célia Géry go back into action immediately. I assume she wants to defend that U23 title, European title that is, so it will be interesting. I do think, and you and I both discussed that last year, that Géry is probably the biggest talent coming up behind the generation of Backstedt and Schreiber. She seems to have developed more and have the possession of better cross skills than riders that were with her in the junior years. And then I'm referring in particular to Kat Ferguson, Imogen Wolf. Chladonova, I think, also has a lot of talent, but with Visma, I can already see her being pulled away into the GC work because they see a GC rider in her. So as unfortunate as that is, that's also just the reality of the sport. But it's interesting to see her start there with so many French riders there. We also saw on the men junior a full Italian podium, a lot of international competition there. And as you say, Burquier, she's back into cross after a few years' absence. I heard the rumors that she wanted to return because she thoroughly enjoyed racing cross, and it's good for her. She improved her form a bit at the end of the mountain bike season. Still sad the trajectory her career has taken. She was one of the most insane off-road talents, finished in the top 10 of the World Cup in Namur on cyclocross, became world champion as a first-year U23, and then health issues put her back significantly, and now at Trinity she seems to have kind of refound some sort of, not just joy, but also some sort of positive state of health, which hopefully will help her, and it's great to see her back in cross.
Yeah, absolutely, and let's see where that will bring her. Then we go to beautiful Italy, where we had the Zoncross Classic Sutrio. On the men's side, it was Filippo Fontana taking the win ahead of Mattia Agostinaccio and Stefano Viezzi rounding up that podium there. Is that for Agostinaccio? It's his second race, but he had a DNF in Rivellino, so it was his first race finishing.
Second, with immediately beating Viezzi. I have no clue what the conditions were there or what the course was like, but I would say it's promising. As early as it is, it's promising because Viezzi, somebody was asking me who I think is like the biggest upcoming U23 talent, and last year Viezzi gave me all reason to believe it was him. But Agostinaccio immediately bouncing it up there, I would say, is very promising.
Also a little surprising, no? I don't know. I think I probably expected Viezzi at this point to be better, but it's super difficult to go off this because I have no idea what the circumstances were and how the racing went. But it tells you something, I guess, that Agostinaccio maybe is a bigger talent than we maybe thought of him, I guess. And well, Viezzi has to fight hard to be that promising, being the best Italian promising talent at this point, because he has a match in Agostinaccio currently. If we then go to the women's side, it was Carlotta Borrello who won it ahead of Rebecca Garibaldi, and Sabrina Rizzi was there in third. What race do I have next? Let me see. Let me scroll a little bit. I think we go now to the National Trophy Series. They had their second day there in Falkirk. On the men's side, it was Thomas Mean who took the win there ahead of Toby Barnes and Daniel Barnes. And on the women's side, it was, Fionn Gilbert ahead of Alderney Baker and Esther Wong from Ireland, rounding up there the top three. Let me see, what do I still have? I have Slovakia, Levoka. There we had on the men's side, this is great, František Očka ahead of Jakub Riemann and Matej Ulik. And on the women's side, it was actually Antonina Bialek from Poland who won ahead of Malvina Mühl and Sofia Ungerova. Sweden also had their second day of the Varberg. On the men's side, it was Clément Horny ahead of Bailey Groenendaal and Stan van Grieken. And on the women's side, it was Xan Kries ahead of Katja Bude and Adèle Urteloop. Then we go to Portugal, where they had the Cyclocross Internationale de Futsela. On the men's side, it was Timothée Gabriel, the Frenchman actually, who won it ahead of Mario Junquera San Milan and Raúl Mira Bonastre. They didn't have a women race. It was only junior women and junior men. Quickly, I give you the winners there. It was Martin Fernandez Garcia on the junior men's side who won it there, and on the women's junior side, it was Mirari Gotski Olarte Kutska or something like that. It's a Basque name, 100%. I tell you what, there are more symbols and all that in it than I can imagine. But then we got racing in Vilnius in Lithuania. There it was Simon Pomian who won it, the Polish rider, ahead of Maris Bogdanovic and Robert Mitas. And on the women's side, it was actually won by Antonina Kurczaszka. The Polish rider won it ahead of her fellow countrywoman Maria Ambroszkiewicz, and Gabija Jonaitite rounded up the podium in her own country. Then we also have the King's CX Day 1, who was actually ridden last night for the European listeners. And that was won by Jules van Kempen, ahead of Tyler Clark and Tom Scott. And on the women's side, we had Lizzie Gonzalez taking the win ahead of Lauren Zerner and Mia Asseltine. They also have their second day coming up, but we are recording it just before that, so hopefully we will be able to mention those results in the next episode, or I don't know, maybe we forget about it and then it's already on to the next race that we will discuss, I guess. So I think that is it.
Yes, but now we end on Cincinnati. That is a very nice bridge, because in the men's junior category, Fincraft Racing took 1-2 with Noah Skolnick and Jacob Hines. Jacob Hines, who had an interview on this podcast a month ago. I think we released it 2 weeks ago. And they had a teammate, Matthew Crabbe, who was in Europe. He was in Ruddervoorde. And I had the opportunity to speak with him. So, to end this episode, here are 6 minutes with Matthew Crabbe. With me here now is one of the American riders over here in Europe right now, the only rider in the junior category, Matthew Crabbe from the Fincraft team. Why are you racing in Europe right now, Matthew?
I'm here for a month trying to get some good race experience before the World Cups kick off in November.
So which races are you doing?
I started yesterday in Essen. Today was Ruddervoorde. Next Saturday and Sunday are Overijse and Heerstrand. And then the last weekend I'm here are Koppenberg Cross and Lokeren.
How did the first two races go?
Not too great. I was pretty sick on Friday. I threw up 4 times. So, yeah, I wasn't able to keep much food in the body. So yesterday was kind of rough. I dropped my chain at the start too and had to stop and fix it. So, yeah, I was 20 seconds off the back of the field. And then today, a little bit better. I had the whole shot and then, yeah, kind of blew up a bit in the first lap, but was able to bounce back to top 15.
You've been over here a number of times on the road, last year as a 15-16 as well. What's something you've noticed is a big shift around the racing compared to racing at home?
I think it's, overall, of course, the level is much higher. At home, there's, 5 or 6 of us that are all at a level, and here there's 20 or 30 that are all almost the same. So, one mistake puts you back 5 places or 6 places, and at home it puts you back 1 or 2. So you just have to be much smoother, I think, and not make those mistakes that will cost you so many positions.
When would you say this trip is a success for you?
I think the top 5 maybe would be a good success. I'm hoping for some good results in the World Cups. Of course, Belgium is where most of the best riders are. So if I can do all right here, then yeah, I hope that'll set me up for success for the rest of the season.
You're doing a variety of courses, kind of picking from the Palais, Overijse and Koppenberg are very climby courses. We have very technical courses in Lokeren and today in Ruddervoorde, here with a bit more sand. Which type of course out of those do you think suits you best, and which one do you need to work most on still?
Oh, I'm not sure. All of the races I do are the fast grass crits at home, so I don't know if I've really found out what kind of rider I am yet.
You're still figuring that out. You've been here on the road. Have you figured out what type of rider you are there yet?
Oh, not really. This summer I had some good bunch sprints, but I also had I had a solo win, I had a few breakaways, so on also a variety of courses. So yeah, still figuring it out a bit.
It's of course natural to still being a junior. Last year you made your podcast debut. Some listeners might remember you from a group interview. Back there you said you had some big goals for this upcoming season. Have you fine-tuned any of those goals? What are your goals overall for this season?
I started the season well, I think, at home. I had my first race I won in Rochester, and then I had another win 2 weeks later in Trek with another podium and another top 5. So pretty good start to the season. Of course, this is the next kind of small goal is this block in Europe, and then I'll have Pan Ams when I go back, and of course the World Cups start 2 weeks after Pan Ams. So yeah, it's kind of one thing at a time right now. Right now I'm focusing on these races in Belgium, and then yeah, Pan Ams will be the next goal.
On a broader level, you're here, you're sacrificing certain things to be here. What's the joy for you? What's the reward that you're willing to make such sacrifices for your career?
I'm hoping I can find some success. It's nice to have a family to stay with also. It makes the time off the bike and away from racing a bit more normal. It's not just all about the racing. I think it's important to make it a bit more normal and a bit more like home as much as you can. So yeah, I think it's fun to be in a new place, ride all these new courses, and find some success at some point.
What about the riding itself? What joy do you get out of that?
Oh, I like seeing these new places. I'm really liking Wallonie right now. The rolling farms and hills are really beautiful, and it's pretty close. We're 15 k's south of Oudenaarde. So yeah, it's a short ride to Wallonie, and I really like how it looks, to be honest.
Then is there any rider that is inspiration and idol to you?
I think it's a bit cliche, but Mathieu van der Poel's dominance, of course, is pretty something to look up to. Yeah, I can't say I'm there, but it's something to strive for. Just how dominant he is, and across such a wide range of courses is pretty spectacular.
Then finally, I heard you've also been working hard on your Dutch. Do you have any final words in Dutch for our listeners?
Oh, I don't know. What should I say?
Well, you can just say thank you.
Oh, dankjewel, Noah. It was a good interview.
Thank you, Matthew, and good luck in the upcoming races.
Thanks.
Then I think that wraps up this episode. Issam, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, and I hope I embarrassed myself enough, but at least the listeners had a laugh at me pronouncing all those names.
Now you will know how I feel. If you have any tips on how to pronounce these names, please send us a voice note, send us an email, noah@cyclocross.com, cyclocross with 3 S's at the end. Feel free to reach out or leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and we always love to be in touch. Thanks so much for listening. See you guys soon. Goodbye.